So now let's take a look at the two scripting functions that you have in RPG in a Box that allow you to manipulate navigation data while the game is running. So what we're going to do is create a new script, which we'll call nav test. And we'll go full screen on this. And what I'll do is I'll add in, first of all, the two functions that you have to use. You have replace navigation, and there's also modify navigation. I'll explain the differences between the two first, and then we'll go over each one separately with a couple of examples for each. So replace navigation allows you to specify an entity, which is the first option here. And what it basically does, it changes existing navigation in your map from one type to another based around an entity. So this could be, for example, a door, or it could be an obstruction of some sort, like a blocked path, which in a way is kind of like what a door is, but the door is obviously a temporary obstruction because you can open and close the door. But it might also be, a path that starts open, but then later there's an earthquake and the ceiling collapses or something, and then rubble blocks the way. So you want to be able to change navigation later on in the game. Something you could either walk down before now means you can't, or something that you couldn't walk down before now means you can. So that's what replace navigation does. You specify an entity which is going to change the navigation around it. So the first part is the entity which is going to do the changing, door or boulder or whatever, the debris, whatever you want to change. And then the two options below, the first one is what's the pre-existing navigation type that's in the map at the moment or at this point in time. So you could be walk and interact, it could be walk only, any of the four types that we went over earlier in the map editor. Now you'll notice there's a fifth one in here called none, which we'll cover in a moment, but let's go over just how this works first. And then the third option is what do you then want to change it to. So this is what you're going to change it from. So for example, you might say walk and interact to pending, which then means you can't walk or interact anymore with this entity because pending doesn't have that functionality. Or if it's something that was already blocked before and you want to open the path up, you might change it the other way around, pending to walk or walk and interact. Okay, it's going to change one type to another. Modify navigation basically allows you to specify two tiles, and you can do that either by giving the tile an ID or by specifying a tile coordinate. Again, we'll go over examples of this in practice so you can see it in action. So you specify two tiles and then what the type of navigation that should exist between those two tiles. Now the key difference between these two functions is that replace navigation requires pre-existing navigation to be on the map, whereas modify navigation doesn't and can actually be used to add navigation into the game that wasn't there when you built it. Okay, so for example, if you had a bit of script that added a bridge across a lake or something that wasn't there to begin with, when you start the game, you either build the bridge or it gets added later, you're then going to obviously want to connect the bridge to the pre-existing navigation lines that you'd have in your map. So again, I will show an example of this so you can see A, what I'm talking about, but also B, how you would go about doing that. So those are the two scripting functions and what the difference is between the two. So replace navigation is a very simple one to use because all it's really doing is it's just allowing you to change the navigation that you already have in a map around a pre-existing entity, okay, whether it be a door, an obstruction, whatever it is. Whereas modify navigation allows you to specify two tiles and connect them up or change the navigation that already exists between them with this option here. Okay, so I will cover none when we get to demonstrating these functions, because it'll make more sense when I show A, what it does, but also something you need to be very mindful of when you use it. Okay, so first of all, let's start with replace navigation. I'm going to delete the modify and we'll make this the nav test script. And I've got a map that I made earlier called pending. Let me just open that up. And if we just fly over here. So what I have here is an example scenario where I've got a boulder object that I threw together, which I've thrown right into the middle of this corridor. And you can see that I've pre-placed pending lines that all connect to the tile that the boulder is on. So the boulder is on this tile here. And so the tile to the right, the tile to the left, the tile down and the tile up, they're all connected via pending lines, okay? Now what that means is that in game, I'm not going to be able to walk down any of these lines, and I'm also not going to be able to interact, if I even could, with this boulder, okay? But more importantly, it's blocking my ability to move down this corridor, or if I was already in this corridor, it's blocking my ability to enter this room. So what we want to do is we want to make it so that at some point later on in this game, this boulder gets removed. And when it is removed, we then want to be able to walk along these lines so we can get down the corridor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the boulder and I'm going to go to its properties. And I'm going to give it an entity ID. So I'll just call it boulder. And I think that's all I need to do for that. And then I'm going to go to our nav test script. Let's just save the map. And we have our replace navigation function here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the wizard icon here. And I'm going to click on entity by ID. I'm going to fill in boulder, because that's the name that we gave the ID for our boulder. And then the lines that pre-exist in the map are pending. And we want to change those to, let's say, walk and interact. Makes the most sense. Okay, so that's it. That's all we had to change. We just had to fill this in because I'd already changed this from walk and interact to pending. Okay, and this is the code down here if you wanted to see what it looks like in code. So it's basically replace navigation, the entity boulder, what it is already pending, what you want to change it to, walk and interact. So let's save that. And we'll go back to our map. And we'll just click on this tile to the side. And we'll just character enters tile. We will assign nav test. So let's save that. And let's test this in game. Now, what I also should show you is how you can show these lines while you're playing the game for testing purposes. You might want to see what's going on with navigation while you're playing the game. So in order to do that, you need to do two things. First of all, you need to go up to the game configuration section. So open this up. And in settings of the game configuration, you're going to want to go to general. And you're going to want to make sure that the debug console is on so that you can open it up in game. If you want to know more about the debug console, you can click this blue question mark icon. It should tell you what key you need to press to open it up and what sort of things you can do with it. As well as that though, you also need to go to settings along the top, options here, and go to quick play and make sure that navigation debugging is also on so that we can run the nav on command, because if you don't have this on, while the console can be opened, you won't be able to turn on the navigation. So with both of those on, the console and the navigation debugging, let's now quick play our game. And we'll load pending. And here we are in the test map. So I'm going to bring down the console. And because I enabled navigation debugging, I can type nav on. And I can now see the navigation lines. So as you can see, the map starts with these pending lines around this boulder. And what that means is I can't click down this corridor. I can't press W. There's no way I can get from this tile to this tile because there's pending lines in the way. Okay. if I was to walk over to this tile, I can't get to this tile over here in a straight line. I'd have to go around. And the game will automatically do that for you. If there is a route from one tile to another, but it can't find the quickest route, it will take the longer route. So if I click this tile, the character will walk around the green lines, but he won't be able to walk in the straight line because there's no navigation ability there. Okay? So, however, the moment we walk onto this tile, we have our script that is going to change the navigation based around this tile. So all the pending lines are going to become walk and interact lines. Okay? Now, this is not a completely desired effect because the boulder is still there, but now we can actually walk along these lines. And you can see that navigation will override physical objects. So if you have navigation in place, if they go through an object or a tile, you will still walk through that tile. So bear that in mind. Now, obviously, this isn't a desired effect. What I forgot to do in my script is after, and I'm just going to do this by typing, after this line, I want to remove entity. Now, it's important you do the replace navigation first if you're going to remove the entity, because once you've removed it, you won't be able to replace the navigation around it because it's gone. So only remove it after it's had its navigation replaced. So you do this first and then you remove the entity. So let's test that again. Go back to pending, put the navigation on, and there's the boulder and there's the pending lines. If we walk over to this tile, it gets removed and we can walk down the corridor. So that's how replace navigation in its simplest form, that's how it works. Now, something to bear in mind with how replace navigation works. It's going to replace every line that is connected to this tile that the entity is on that is of the same type. So you'll notice it changes all of these 4 pending lines at the same time, just with one command. Just with this one function, it changes all 4 of these lines at once, okay? Let's say, however, you didn't want to change, let's say, for example, you wanted to always never be able to walk down this path. Then what you might do is you might change this path. Let's go back to the navigation mode. Press N to cycle to interact only. If I change this line to an orange interact only line, because the function is only changing pending lines to walk and interact lines, it will ignore this line. So let me show you that in effect. So if we turn the navigation on, we have this interact line here, which is going to pretty much, in this case, act like a pending line because we're not going to be able to walk down it because it's an interact only line. You can't walk down an interact only line. Okay, so it kind of acts like a pending line, but it's a different type of line. It's not pending, it's an interact only line. So when we walk onto this tile, it's going to remove the entity and it's only going to change these 3 pending lines here while leaving this one intact. Yeah, that's still an orange line, which means I can't walk from this tile to this one in a straight line. I have to go round. So it's a silly example, but it's just to show you that if you want to only change certain lines around an entity, you have to change their type because they're all going to change at once otherwise. Okay. If you want a bit more control over changing the navigation, that's when you would use the modify navigation rather than replace. Replace is a sort of very simple, quick way of changing navigation, but it has its limitations. Okay, as you can see, it's going to change all the lines at once unless you change a couple of the line types. Yeah. Another example I'll quickly show you is if we go back into the game and I change to a different map, and instead of going to pending, we go to door. Here's another example I set up. we turn the navigation on. This is another example in which you would find replace navigation being used for doors. Okay, so we have a door here which starts closed, and it has an interact only line at the moment that goes in between the door and the corridor. Okay, so I can't, if I was to click on the corridor, I can't walk to it, which makes sense because there's a door that's closed in the way. But I can interact with the door because the interact line is there, so I can still click on the door. Now, when I click on the door, what it's going to do is it's going to replace navigation between the door to change interact lines to walk and interact. So if I click the door, it opens, and then it changes this line here to a green line so I can now walk through the door. Okay? And then when you close the door, it's going to change it back. Now, something very interesting is going to happen in a minute, and it's a good thing that it does because I can use this to highlight again an issue with replace navigation. When I close the door, notice how all of these change, whereas when it started, when I loaded the map, and let me see if I can load the map again. When I loaded, no, it's saved the state, but when I initially started the game, only one line was orange, it was this line here, whereas these were green. But closing the door has changed all of these lines to orange afterwards, which I don't really want because it means like if I was standing here and I closed the door, I'm now stuck because I can't walk down any of these lines. I'd have to open the door to be able to move, which is, you know, a bit silly. But it's to really show you that you need to, you know, be careful with replace navigation because it can put you in situations like this. So why is this happening and how do we fix it? So let's go to the door map. And let's go over to where the door is. So the issue is that the tile that the door is on is actually, let's go full screen for a second, is actually this tile here. Okay, it's not a corridor tile. It's this tile that's just in front. The door is basically placed at the far edge of this tile, which basically means that when we run replace navigation, we're saying replace navigation around this entity for every connected tile to the tile that this entity is on. Well, that's this tile, and this tile, because these tiles are all connected to that one. So that's why those lines change. So two ways to solve this is to change the type. So you might, for example, change this to walk and interact. So I can always walk down these lines and they're not going to change because, as you know from the previous example, if you change the type, then the replace navigation won't change these because we're not specifying walk only, we're specifying interact only in our door code, which, let me just show that for a second. The door code is a quick script that's basically saying, this is the code for it, by the way, if the door state is closed, then play the animation open and replace navigation, interact only, and specify that it should become walk and interact, and then set the state to open. Otherwise, if the state is open, then close the door and replace the navigation, toggling it back. So doors are quite simple to make. They're made in this sort of simple fashion. So that would be one way to fix it. So if we just show this in action, just so you can see the effect it has. So we'll go to door, we'll put the navigation on. Now if we go to this tile here, we can open the door. These don't change, but the orange one, interact line, did change. And now if we go back out, close the door, only this line changes. These have never changed because they are of a different type, so replace navigation ignores those lines completely. So with that covered, let's now go into the other function, which is modify navigation. So let's go to our script, navtest, and let's get rid of these two functions. And let's add in a modify navigation. So, as I said, with modify navigation, you specify 2 tiles and how you want them to be connected up. So for this, I have an example map. So let's go back to the map editor and let's load a map called Gap. So what I have here is a map where I've pre-built a couple of areas that each have their own connected navigation. However, there's a bridge in between them which currently doesn't have any navigation. And let's say this is an example where this bridge gets added later on in the game. Let's say, for example, if we group these up as bridge, and then we go and hide that group for a second to simulate the fact that the bridge isn't there. So let's say these are 2 areas which are disconnected at the beginning of your game. One of your objectives is to build a bridge, or or later on in the game a bridge gets built so that you can walk across it. So later on in the game that bridge appears. Okay. However, when you add tiles in the game, unless you specify what navigation between them, it's going to be like this. There's going to be no navigation. So while the bridge may physically be there, you can see the bridge, you're not going to actually be able to walk across it because there's no connecting lines connecting this tile, to, for example, to this tile. Okay, you need to actually specify that these tiles in between should also be connected with lines in between them. And that's where modify navigation comes in, because it's going to take the 2 tiles at a time and connect them up. Now, a few things you need to know about modify navigation. Okay, first of all, there has to be a physical connection between 2 tiles. So for example, if this tile doesn't exist, then you're not going to be able to connect this tile to the one here because there isn't a tile there. Yeah. Also, you can't connect this tile to that tile. They have to actually be physically connected to one another. Okay, so you can't do diagonals. You can't do, you can't connect those 2 tiles and hope that it's going to do everything in between. That's not how it works. You have to do 2 close tiles at a time. So for example, if you wanted to connect this tile here to this tile here with all of these in between, you're not going to be able to just go that tile and that tile, connect them. That's not going to work. What you have to do is you have to say this tile and this tile, connect them, then that tile and that tile, connect them, and then that tile and that tile, connect them. So you have to do it bit by bit, because this function will only take 2 tiles at a time, and they have to be physically touching one another in the editor or in the game. Okay, so, and they can't be diagonal. They actually have to be either beside one another or in front of one another. Okay, so here we have a situation where I've got this bridge that's not connected and I want to connect it up in the game at a later stage. So there's 2 ways we can go about this. We can either use tile IDs, which is the easiest way because then you can name each tile and it kind of makes sense. But you can also use the coordinates of the tiles, but then you obviously have to grab each coordinate and make sure you know which one you're referring to. I'll show you both just because there's something worth knowing when it comes to doing it via coordinates. So in fact, I'll do that now. I'll cover that now. If you want to use coordinates, because I'm not going to, but if you want to use coordinates, what you do is you right click and you copy the coordinate of a tile, and then in your modify navigation, you would, let's go full screen on this so we can see it properly. You would click on the wizard and you'd do tile by coordinate. You would paste the coordinate in, but notice how in the expression builder, it says tile 000. But when we paste this, it's going to say coord and then the coordinates. So what you need to do is you then need to go into the text bit here and change it from coord back to tile, because modify navigation has to use tile coordinate rather than coord coordinate. Okay, so when you copy your coordinates, make sure you also change the word coordinate to tile. because modify navigation, as I say, needs tiles rather than actual coordinates. If that makes sense, okay? And then obviously if we wanted to connect this tile's coordinates to the other tile's coordinates, we'd go back to the map. We'd click this tile next, copy its coordinates, go back to our script and click this wizard, tile by coordinate, paste, and then tile, and say OK. If we were to now run this script, so this is nav test, let's save that and quick play. Oh, let's save the map first. Let's go to connect navigation. Let's bring down the console, type nav on. So at the moment you can see there's no way to get across this bridge because there's no navigation. If we bring down the console and I just type execute nav test, we can see that it creates a single line because we connected these two tiles up with the modify navigation. So that's what it does. It adds a walk and interact line between these two tiles. Okay. If navigation already existed, by the way, if there was already, let's say, pending lines along here, and we said modify navigation between these two tiles, walk and interact, it will change the pending line to a walk and interact line. Let me just quickly show you what I mean by that. If I was to actually go into navigation and put a pending line between those two tiles, save the map and play, then you can see that that line already exists. And then the moment I execute the script, it overwrites. So it kind of acts like a replace navigation, but you have a lot more control over it because you're specifying the tiles. So because you can specify the tiles, you can also specify which tiles don't change. So that issue we were having with the door, where when we were closing it, other tiles were changing, you wouldn't have that issue with modify navigation because you would specify which two tiles were changing and which ones therefore aren't. So this command here, the modify navigation, is a little bit more powerful than replace navigation. However, it's, a bit more involved. So this is like the advanced version, if you will. What I meant to cover with replace navigation, sorry, I completely forgot, is let's go back quickly to the door and let's go back to pending. There's one last thing I meant to cover with replace navigation. Let's put these back to pending lines. Okay, you can, of course, change to a fifth type. We go back to replace navigation for a second. And the entity by ID is Boulder. We can change interact from pending. We can change to none. I did say that I would talk about what none does, and something you have to be very careful about when you use none. So let's save this and run the game. And go to pending. Bring down the console and type nav on. So here we have our pending lines, which we're now going to change to none. So what happens when I step on the script that does that? They get deleted. Notice how the navigation lines have just completely gone. Okay. So the thing to be careful of with replace navigation, if you replace navigation with none, is you can't then reverse that. So you can't then later on have another replace navigation that says none to, let's say, walk and interact. So if I now save this and go to my map, so what we're trying to do now when we step on this tile here is we want to replace the navigation entity boulder, we want to change none to something so that, something happens with this boulder even though there's no navigation. So let's save the map and run the game. Go to pending, nav on. So we can see there's no navigation here at all. If I step onto this script, nothing changes. The reason for that is replace navigation only works with pre-existing navigation, okay? If at any point you replace the pre-existing navigation with none, i.e. delete it, you can't then add it back. So if you want to later on connect these up again, you're going to have to do that with the modify navigation function. So instead of going via entity, you're going to have to go by tiles again and connect them up. So you're going to have to connect that tile to that tile again, that tile to that tile, and then that tile to that tile. Yep. You're going to have to use the modify navigation if you've ever removed navigation using replace navigation to none. You're going to have to use modify navigation to put it back. Does that make sense? So if we want to connect this bridge completely up, we're actually going to have to do this in stages. Okay, we're going to have to do this 2 tiles at a time, going across all of the bridge. Okay, so as I say, if you're using modify navigation, it's a really good idea to make sure you've got the navigation debug option on, because you're going to want to be able to see in your game what is happening with these lines so you can problem solve what's going on if it's not behaving the way it should. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to give each of these tiles IDs just so it's easier to follow what's happening. So I'm going to call this one tile 1. I'm not going to get very creative with their names. I'm just going to keep it simple. This is tile 2, tile 4, sorry, tile 3, skipped one, tile 4, and then we'll come back down to here. This can be tile 5, tile 6, tile 7, and tile 8. Okay, so we've got 8 tiles involved in this process. They've all been named. Okay, so what that now means basically is we can go to our script and we can specify our IDs. Now remember, we have to do this 2 tiles at a time. So we have to specify, first of all, tile 1 should be connected to tile 2. And we want to connect it, let's say, with walk and interact. Okay. Now I'm going to do this via the text because it's a lot quicker. I'm just basically going to copy and paste this function quite a few times. So let's just save that for a second, go full screen, and then edit. So I'm basically just going to copy that and paste, 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 paste. That might be too many, might be not enough, we'll see. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect tile 1 to tile 2. Then we need to connect tile 2 to tile 3. Then we need to connect tile 3 to tile 4. Now remember what I said, that tiles have to be physically next to one another or in front of one another in order to be able to be connected. So I can't connect tile 4 to tile 5 because in the map, tile 4 is here, tile 5 is there. Okay, so we're not going to connect tile 4 to tile 5. So in our script, let's go full screen again. After tile 3 to tile 4, we're going to jump down to tile 5 and connect that to tile 6. And then we're going to connect tile 6 to tile 7. And then we're going to connect tile 7 to tile 8. Now what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to comment out these 2, but I'm going to actually need them. But I'll show you why I need them in a minute. For now, let's apply and save that. And let's run the game. And see what this does. We'll connect navigation. And we will type nav on. So we currently have no way to get across this bridge. If I bring down the console again, I might execute the script. It connects the bridge, and we can now walk across the bridge. Now, the only issue we've got, it's up to you whether this is an issue or not, it all depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but there's no way to get from this tile to this tile by just walking, from towards the left. We'd have to walk around because there's no line going from this piece of the bridge to this piece of the bridge. So what you would need to do, that's why I have these commented out lines in my code that I'm going to actually put back, because I want to connect those up as well. So you need to think about connecting every tile up, okay, if that's what you want. So we also need to specify not only that these should be connected, but we also need to specify that these should be connected, okay? So we need tile 2 to connect itself to tile 6. So tile 2 needs to be connected to tile 6, and also tile 3 needs to be connected to tile 7. So if we now apply and save and run that, now we will have a fully connected bridge after our script is run. So we'll go to connect navigation, we will show the navigation, and we will run the script. And now we have a fully connected bridge that we can walk across it, but we can also walk around it wherever we want to go. Okay, so that's how you use modify navigation. And as I say, you can also use it to change type as well. So for example, if we just quickly go back to gap. So instead of having no navigation, what we might do is have pre-existing navigation that has the same effect. So for example, we might have walk and interact lines in the middle of the bridge, connecting those up, but pending lines connecting the bridge to each side of the islands, if you will. So in game, you're still not going to be able to walk across this bridge to begin with, but we don't have to do the whole bridge itself. The bridge itself is connected, but it's not connected to each side of the bridge, if that makes sense. So we're using these pending lines just to stop the player from being able to actually walk across the bridge. But when they can walk across the bridge, we don't also need to connect the bridge up. The bridge is actually connected, but we just want to change the connection from the bridge to the islands, to the sides, when we're ready for that to happen. So then what we can do, so that would be tile 1 to tile 2, tile 5 to tile 6, tile 7 to 8, tile 3 to 4, etc. So if we go save this and go to our script, go full screen. So we want tile 1 to 2 to change. We don't need tile 2 to 3 to change because that's the one in the middle. We do want to change 3 to 4. We do want to change 5 to 6, but we don't want to change 6 to 7. You do need to change 7 to 8, and we don't need to change both of those because they're already connected. So if we apply and save, you can see we've cut down the amount of modify navigations we need. And if we run this, connect the navigation, we've got our pending lines, which means we can't actually get across the bridge. But if I now execute our script, it only changes the pending lines, so now we can walk across. But these were already connected anyway, so these didn't change. But more importantly, we can now get across the bridge. So there's so many different things you can do with modify navigation. It can add navigation, it can delete navigation, because obviously you could specify none. So if you fully wanted to disconnect these tiles, you could change this to none in here. So that would actually then delete the navigation. But unlike replace navigation, you could then modify it back. You could then change these two tiles to have walk and interact, and it would connect them up again. So that's the advantage you have with modify navigation. So that is navigation in a nutshell, really. I've gone over all of the basics, what the two functions are, also how you use navigation in the map editor, what the lines mean and how you use each one. So I hope this video has helped give you an introduction into navigation and helped answer any questions you might have had with how it works and how to use it. If you have any further questions, do feel free to ask on the Discord. For now, that'll wrap this video up. Thanks for watching.